I understand.
Welcome to BSRM Presents Straight Talk. This is Dhaka Tribune editor Zafar Sobhan, and I'm joined in conversation today with economist and political expert Forrest Cookson. Forrest, it's wonderful to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Today, what I would like to talk about a little is it's interesting times in the United States political world. It seems every 20 years or so we have an impeachment saga, and right on schedule. Here we have one with President Trump and his phone call to the Ukrainian premier. Why don't you talk us through a little bit about what was the subject matter of the phone call and what was the background to it, which has got us to where we are today?
President Trump is undertaking two things.
Yeah.
One thing is to undermine the Mueller report and the accusations there against the Russians as the instigators of the support for him in the 2016 election.
Right.
And he would like to shift this blame on somebody else and paint it as an intrigue organized by the American intelligence community, perhaps with the assistance of some of their European friends, to ensure that Mr. Trump did not win the presidency. That's objective number one. Objective number two is to try to discredit and hurt the reputation of Joe Biden, the leading candidate on the Democratic side for the 2020 election. And, of course, Mr. Obama's vice president.
That's right. Now, of course, a lot of the focus has been on the second, the second of these 2 points, vis-a-vis, that seems to be easier for people to understand, a straight-up threat. Please investigate the son of the likely Democratic nominee. That's something most people in the American public and the media seem to have cottoned onto. But do you think the first accusation is equally important and equally worthy of our attention?
Well, I think it's extremely important to Mr. Trump and also to Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin would like to shift the blame for the interference in the election to someone else, and the Ukrainians seem like a reasonable target there.
But, I mean, wasn't the Mueller report basically a dead letter at this stage? It came, it was pretty much a sort of a damp squib in the final analysis, and Trump seemed to have gotten away with it.
Well, yes, but for whatever reason, as soon as the Mueller report was submitted and had been digested, then the Attorney General of the United States announced that he was initiating an investigation of the origins of this. Why had this started, and where had the impetus for the investigation begun?
Yeah.
Now, that is a complicated issue that I think we don't know everything. It seems to be important to Trump to try to discredit this, the Mueller report's volume against the Russians.
Yeah.
Within the United States, there's no serious argument that about the first volume of the Mueller report, which lays out the activities of the Russian intelligence service interfering in the American election.
Yeah.
And most people accept this as a solid piece of investigation.
Right.
So it's that part Trump is trying to attack. Yeah. And part of this is Trump's ego, because he
wants exoneration, full exoneration. And it upsets him that he's even been investigated.
The Mueller report said he was not complicit in what the Russians were up to.
Yeah.
But I believe President Trump does not like the fact that everyone thinks the Russians helped him.
Right.
He wants to believe that he won this election by himself, and the idea that the Russians were there messing around in the election.
And he wouldn't have won without their help is unacceptable.
Yes. Well, who knows whether? I mean, that conclusion nobody is willing to reach, because no one knows how to analyze it to say whether how much it helped or didn't
Well, yeah,
help.
it's a hard single factor to isolate in determining that. But it seems, again, the main focus, though, the primary focus, and certainly what the press and the public understands is, no, I wouldn't call it a request, it was more like a demand to investigate Hunter Biden, Joe Biden's son, Joe Biden, of course, being President Obama's vice president and the person leading the polls for the Democratic nomination this year.
Right. Apparently in this telephone call, Mr. Trump said, after the president of Ukraine had said that he needed the assistance of the United States, which he does, he's in a war with the Russians and under tremendous political pressure from the Russians. He said he needed help, and President Trump more or less said, I'd like you to do a favor for me.
Yeah.
And then he gave these 2 investigations that he wanted to have done. Now, whether this was a quid pro quo, as they're arguing about, was Mr. Trump saying, if you don't do these investigations, we're not going to give you the military support.
That's certainly the logical inference, isn't it?
Well, it is. And of course, Mr. Trump is denying that. But I think any reasonable person would, as you say, draw the logical inference that this was very much Mr. Trump saying, you want this aid, you better carry out these investigations.
And of course, what's interesting, if you look at Trump's approach to U.S. foreign policy, one of the ideas he's always put forth from his days on the campaign trail is that the U.S. should get much more from its allies, that the allies are not doing enough for the United States, and that, they should give more trade concessions, they should do what we want because we're doing so much for you. So in his mind, saying that, well, okay, if you want more assistance, this is what you have to do for me, isn't so out of bounds. And of course, the way he looks at it, asking for assistance for his presidency is no different from asking for assistance for the United States, because I don't think he draws a distinction between himself in the office he occupies.
No, I think that's 100% correct. From the beginning of his career as a real estate developer is transactional.
That's right.
You do something and I do something.
He's a deal maker. He talks about it all the time. He's written a book about it.
And so the idea of here is a constant policy which we are supporting, and our support for that policy has nothing to do with the particular detail that might come along. The case against Mr. Biden.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Biden, as Vice President of the United States, was charged by President Obama with responsibility for American policy in the Ukraine. Yeah. So Biden is a big player here. Yeah. The Ukrainians, like all countries, have figured out that the way to success in dealing with Washington is to make friends as high up in the hierarchy as you can manage. The British had President Clinton as a Rhodes Scholar and had spent a couple years at Oxford, and so they played on this to try to keep a strong relationship.
And you have Saudi Arabia being very close to the Bush family.
Yes.
In the U.S., the Saudi ambassador to Washington for many years, Prince Bandar, was extraordinarily close, both to George W. Bush and also his father. So, yes, there's an understanding that's how politics is done in Washington, D.C.
So the Ukrainians don't have much background here. They don't have...
They're new to the game.
They don't have people out there on the golf course playing golf with the president or the Secretary of State. Yeah. They don't have long experience in contacts between the two countries. Ukraine has been a part of the Soviet Union until I guess they really become independent about 2000. Yeah. What happened here is a company, a natural gas company in the Ukraine, offered Hunter Biden, the son of Joe Biden, a position on the board of the company. And the fee for this was $50,000 a month.
A fine sum.
So people see this, in my opinion, probably correctly, as an attempt by the Ukraine to build influence and ability to talk to Joe Biden, the guy they're really interested in talking to. So this is the point that Mr. President Trump is attacking.
Yeah.
This is pure corruption here. The Biden family is getting a lot of money on an issue that they are representing American interests, and so this is not good.
Okay, good. So on that note, we shall take a break. When we come back, let's talk a little bit about where the investigation, where the impeachment hearings are and where they are likely to go in the near future. Thanks a lot. Please join us after the break. Welcome back. Forrest, before the break, you were talking about the mechanics of impeachment. Talk us through that a little. How does it work, and where do you see things going in the next 12 to 15 months?
Okay. When the authors of the American Constitution wrote the Constitution, they figured that they had to have because they had a president,
Right.
and who was elected more or less by popular vote. It was a complicated mechanism, but it was disconnected from the Congress.
That's right.
So unlike the parliamentary system, where if you don't like your prime minister, the Parliament can get rid of the prime minister themselves. They don't need any special mechanism to do that. The getting rid of the president was outside of another election was not possible. So
it was designed in such a way. They say high crimes and misdemeanors.
So the impeachment process was focused on trying to, if you needed to get rid of the president between elections, this was the way you did it.
What's the standard and how do you do it? Yeah.
And so the process is straightforward. The lower house, the House of Representatives, by a majority vote of people who are present, impeach the president. It's like a charge sheet. Here are the things he's done bad. That are, and then you move to the Senate, and the Senate sits as a sort of jury, and with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the prosecutors are people from the House of Representatives who come and make the prosecution case. It's like a court. You can hear testimony. You can cross-examine. The president has his lawyers there who defend him. And then when the case is finished and the two lawyers have summed up their positions, then the Senate votes. And to convict the president, you need 2/3, which means 67 of the
votes out of 100.
But I think it's of those present. So if some senators are not there, then it's slightly less. But the reason for impeaching a president, the Constitution says three things. It says treason, it says bribery, and it says high crimes and misdemeanors.
Which are not defined.
Which are not defined and have never been litigated in any cases. There is a little bit of write-up in Madison's notes of the process of the discussions on the Constitution.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I remember back when Clinton was impeached, President Clinton was impeached in the 1990s, there was a lot of talk as to, by what definition of the term did the crimes he was accused of even rise to the level of being impeached?
Yes, that was a serious issue in those days. And there's a little bit of discussion in one of the Federalist Papers, which were propaganda pieces supporting the Constitution, written at the time of the Constitution was written. There's a sense, as I wrote once, that you may not be able to define it, but you know it when you see it.
That's Judge Potter Stewart, if I'm not wrong.
So this is the process that's underway. So now the House of Representatives is having its meetings, hearings, to try to determine whether they are going to write this charge sheet against the president.
But you see, I mean, it seems clear to me, and again, going back 20 years to the Clinton presidency, this is very much now devolved into a political football, in that it's very clear to me that because the Democrats have a majority in the House, regardless of the merits of the case, that they are going to succeed in impeaching President Trump. But by the same token, since they do not have the votes in the Senate, I see their being at this stage almost zero possibility of them securing a conviction. Now, that could change. It could be that more revelations will come up. It could be that President Trump becomes so toxic to the Republican senators that they feel that the only way they can save themselves and save the party is to cut him loose. But I'm not sure how likely that is in the next 12 months. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with the first part that it's not. They're going to impeach him. I think that's almost a sure thing.
Yeah.
You need 20 senators to change their 20 Republican senators to change their position.
That's a high bar.
20 out of the 53 that are there.
Yeah.
You can probably count up to 10 if you count every conceivable possibility that might vote for impeachment.
Yeah.
There are 3 or 4 senators that have already spoken out.
Right, you've got Mitt Romney, you've got Susan Collins, but I'm not adding it up to 20 any which way you cut it.
I agree. Almost impossible to get to 20. So unless there's something that emerges that is much more serious than anything they've been talking about, the Senate, as you say, is not going to convict him, and he will go on to be president. The case that they are bringing is that in this telephone call, and perhaps in associated and earlier communications between the Ukrainian government and the White House, Mr. Trump was basically bargaining the military support that the United States had agreed, that is, the Congress had agreed to give, and hence was essentially a commitment of the American government. The president could slow it down, but couldn't stop that from. The president was bargaining that against trying to get the 2 investigations that we talked about carried out by the Ukrainians.
Yes.
And so this is Mr. Trump using his power as president to try to get even with people and to attack what looks like his main
rival,
potential opponent in the election. Yes.
But it seems to me there are 2 things. So whether or not he is removed through impeachment process is one thing. The other is, how does this play out in the next 12 months. So, for instance, when President Clinton was being impeached, he was in his 2nd term. So it certainly put a damper on his 2nd term. It hurt his agenda in terms of how he could enact it. And it also probably went some ways to hurting Al Gore's chances of being elected afterwards. And, of course, he subsequently lost the election in controversial circumstances to George W. Bush. But the question is, it could be that they don't succeed in removing him, but this actually hurts him very much in the run-up to the election. And so he is a weakened, damaged candidate. Secondly is, how is this going to play out with respect to Joe Biden, if indeed he is the Democratic nominee? Because, certainly President Trump's position, or his what we know about him, he's a bit of a street fighter. If he's going down, he's going to make sure he brings Biden down with him to a large extent. So how do you see that playing out?
Well, I think in the case of Mr. Biden, I think already he's been significantly weakened by this. The instinct of most people in hearing the story is to be suspicious.
Sure.
Right? I mean, we all react to this story of what? What's going on here? This is not right. Even though nothing legally wrong may have been done, it still has a bad smell to it.
Sure.
And I think this has hurt Biden, and I think it's hurt him both publicly and personally.
Yeah.
Biden's personal history is tragic.
Yes.
There was an automobile accident in which his wife and his daughter died, and his 2 sons were badly injured when they were infants.
Yes.
And then one son died recently from a brain tumor, leaving one of the children from his original marriage. So his life has been tragic. He's lost family and in sad ways, and And I think he's a sensitive kind of guy.
Yeah.
So I think he's probably hurt personally by all of this.
Sure.
And he sees his reputation being impugned. He sees his younger
son's
son
reputation,
being
I'm sure he doesn't want
impugned.
that.
And
Yeah.
So this is, I mean, most people, perhaps like you and I, would have said, if we were the father, we'd have said, get out of there. What are you doing? You can't do this.
Yeah.
I mean, almost common sense says that
Yeah.
Hunters did something that was foolish.
Yeah.
So my guess right now is that Biden will not get the Democratic nomination.
Yeah.
That he has been fatally wounded. by this.
So in some senses, as far as Trump is concerned, that's mission accomplished.
Yes.
What does this do, however, to Trump? Does this hurt him? And do you see him being the Republican nominee come next November?
Oh, well, I mean,
No
it
question.
would be no question about that. And I mean, he may go completely bananas. That's always possible, and many people think that. The psychiatric assessments, such as they are,
Yes.
all indicate that he has a highly dysfunctional personality that badly needs treatment. And I mean, he has a lot of pressures on
Sure.
him. And
But you don't see him going anywhere. You think he will ride out the impeachment process, and also he will not be weakened sufficiently for the Republican Party to think that it's in their interest to run a different candidate in 2020.
I don't think so. I think that's almost inconceivable. I mean, this would take a public breakdown into dementia or
Yeah. Do you think it will hurt him? I mean, so he won't be impeached, or he won't be removed from office. He will regain the nomination. Will this hurt him come November 2020?
Unclear. In the end, I think it probably won't have much effect. I think most Americans, from reading the polls and hearing what few interviews I hear over the television, people are not paying much attention to this. You know, this does not impress people as a big deal one way or another.
Well, no, I mean, I do remember this from 20 years ago, and it seems to me that, people do have, it's called sort of fatigue over this kind of thing,
Well,
corruption fatigue.
We all have Trump fatigue.
Yeah.
After 4 years of enormous amounts of noise and.
Well, it may be another 4. We'll have to wait and see. And I think what you're saying is these impeachment processes are probably not likely to change that one way or the other. On that note, Forrest, thank you very much. We're out of time. It's been wonderful talking about this. Let's
Thank
watch
you for having
the
me.
news. It's been a pleasure. And let's watch the news over the next months and see how this crisis unfolds. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you. This has been Zafar Sobhan presenting Straight Talk. My guest today has been Forrest Cookson. Hope to see you again 2 weeks from today. Good night.
I understand.